Samuel, let me know when we're ready to start. I see y'all are still letting people in.
I think we're gonna wait 30 seconds and then you can go ahead and start because it is 6 o'clock.
Sounds good, thank you. I wasn't counting, but I think that's been about 30 seconds, if not more. Good evening, everybody. I am Leah LaRue with the Department of City Planning at the City of Atlanta. And I am thrilled to be here with you all tonight. And I'm super excited because, not just because you're here, although I'm very glad that you're here, but I'm also really excited to have some of my coworkers with me tonight. And I'll first introduce the folks from my team, my immediate coworkers, and then we'll introduce the folks that are from the Office of Design. They're leading this session tonight. So I know we have Samantha Terry, who is the Program Manager for Education and Training and the NPU University Registrar. So I know you all know her.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Also, I saw Tony somewhere. Tony McNeil is the Program Manager for Outreach and Engagement.
Hey, everyone.
I believe I saw Daniel, who is our Resources and Support Manager, Daniel Vasquez.
Hello.
And Nicole, who also works on the Resources and Support team. Nicole Jenkins.
Hi, everyone.
And I don't think I saw Kip, did I? No, okay. Sometimes he pops up and I didn't even see him in there. Okay, so that is our team, and we're really excited. I think I need to mute somebody. All righty. We are excited to present this class. So if you haven't been in any of our classes before, I do like to say at the beginning that by now we're 2.5 years in, so I think everyone is accustomed to this, but I still like to say we are at the mercy of technology. And we're glad that we're able to present this class virtually so that you can enjoy it from the comfort of your home or wherever you may be. But we are indeed at the mercy of Xfinity, AT&T, and whoever else provides internet service. So if we lose a signal or anything gets wonky, please just bear with us as we work through that, and someone will hop on in and we'll manage the moment, but please do be patient with us in the event that happens. I'll talk a little bit about our ground rules, classroom rules. I think, okay, thank you. So please do keep your microphones muted. This helps us cut back on background noise. Pardon the siren that's going by as I'm speaking. This helps us cut down on background noise, feedback, and anything else. By now, everyone has already realized what happens when there's a microphone that is supposed to be muted and isn't, and you hear all the weird stuff in the background. Sometimes it's actual movement or whatever, and sometimes it's just a weird kind of signal radio type of thing. To avoid that, please do keep your microphones muted so everyone can hear the speaker. If you feel so moved, you can use the reactions at the bottom of your screen to clap if something particularly resonates with you. I know Mr. Young will give us plenty of clap-worthy moments. And if you haven't already, if you're new to our classes or you just forgot to grab your pen and paper, this is a really good time to go grab a piece of paper and a pen or anything that you need to take notes. At the end of the presentation, if you've got a question or would like to make a comment, or ask a question, because we don't really do comments, but if you'd like to ask a question at the end of the presentation, please do raise your hand to be placed in the queue. Last but not least, our golden rule: please keep all questions brief and relevant to course content. All questions must be relevant to course content. And if the question veers a little bit off topic, especially if it gets into something that is political in nature or controversial, especially if it is not the subject of the course. We will probably jump in and ask you to redirect your question. So please do keep your questions brief and relevant to course content. That's for everybody in the class. It makes people feel a lot more comfortable with the questions that are being asked. I think that is, thank you, Samantha. So to raise your hand, at the bottom of your screen, you will see a button that says reactions. And if you click on that button that says reactions, you will see a pop-up box that says raise hand. When you click on that, your hand will be raised. If you've never done it before, you haven't done it in a while, feel free to practice right now. We'll clear all of the raised hands as soon as I'm done. Again, to do that, if you're doing it for the first time or haven't done it in a while, you can click on reactions and then raise hand, and that will raise your hand and we'll see you in the queue. All righty, at this point, I think it's a good time to introduce my coworker, the interim director of the Office of Design, who formerly held the position as assistant director for historic preservation. Doug Young is, I don't have a bio or anything in front of me, but he is absolutely one of my favorite people at City Hall. He probably doesn't know this. He's also our elder statesman, but definitely one of my favorite people because he is just so knowledgeable about all things Atlanta, all things City Hall, and even planning and how that relates to historic preservation and the work that he and his team does over in the Office of Design. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Doug, and if he's got any introductions to make, I will let him do that. Thank you so much for being here, Doug.
Sure. Thank you, Leah, for having me. Good evening, everybody. Once again, my name is Doug Young, and just by someone raising their hand, can you all hear me fine? Those on the call? Great. Excellent. I appreciate your time tonight and the opportunity to talk about Atlanta city design and how that's been implemented through the city's historic preservation work. As Leah mentioned, I'm the interim director of the Office of Design, which includes 3 studios on behalf of the city of Atlanta. One is the Historic Preservation Studio, which I used to lead up till about March of this year. We also have our planning studio and our public space studio. And we'll talk very briefly about those, but most of the conversation tonight is going to be how Atlanta city design has been implemented or is continuing to be implemented through the city's historic preservation work. And we'll talk about some examples of our recent activity in that regard. And then also at the end of the class, we will show a video that hopefully will get you excited about the city's history and historic preservation if you aren't already excited about that. I have been with the city for some time. I've been with the Department of City Planning all of that tenure. Prior to that, many years ago, back in the day, I worked for the city's Olympic Redevelopment Authority after coming out of graduate school at Georgia Tech. So I'm not a native Atlantan, but I've lived here longer than anywhere else in my life. So I'm doing my best to try to fit in after about 20 some years here in Atlanta. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. So let me get that ready to go, and I will share my screen. And I think we should be all set. Yeah, all right, let me share. And we're gonna go to view, full screen. And can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So we're going to talk about Atlanta City Design, which is the City of Atlanta's vision document. It was created about 4 or 5 years ago. And as we'll see, it's really a different kind of document the City of Atlanta having produced over the years. And we'll talk why it's different in the beginning of this conversation, and then we'll move into how one of the ways it's been implemented is through the city's historic preservation work. But before we talk about the document itself, we really need to talk a little bit about how it fits into the city's historic context in the general sense. So interesting timeline here of the City of Atlanta's history, starting with its incorporation in the 1800s up to almost the present day. And what we're really trying to show here is that the City of Atlanta has really evolved over time. And if you look at the top of that graphic, you'll see the geographic footprint of the city being added to over time, through annexations and whatnot. And if you look at the 1970 sort of time period there, that's where the city until very recently had peaked in its population. And then since that time, it had been slowly going down and really started to rebuild starting in the 1990s, really related to the Atlanta Olympic Games and the city hosting those. But, you know, if you think about the city of Atlanta and growth and how it's evolved, really the question becomes, how does this pattern in the past and this sort of set of circumstances lead to a future to the city of Atlanta? You know, how does that set us up for what happens in the future? And the biggest premise of Atlanta city design is that we can't be static in the city of Atlanta. So not changing is really not an option for the city of Atlanta. The question is, how do we embrace that change? How do we purposefully plan for that change? Or more importantly, how do we design for that change so that it's inclusive to everybody who wants to be in the city of Atlanta, but more importantly, probably, is the folks who are already here in the city of Atlanta. In fact, in particular, the folks who help make the city of Atlanta what it is today. So we want to make sure that that future is not leaving out folks that built the city of Atlanta through that timeline we just talked about. And that inclusivity is really important to understand about Atlanta city design, in that, and at the same time, that inclusivity not being seen as a detriment, but really as a way to empower the city to embrace that change that's coming, you know, in the future. So the unique thing about Atlanta city design, if folks who are not familiar with it, it is a physical book, by the way, but it's really organized around these 5 values: equity, progress, ambition, access, and nature. And that's a little different than probably what you're used to seeing from a city planning document, certainly from the city of Atlanta, because generally speaking, our city planning documents are organized around the geography or maybe some sort of planning topic, you know, transportation, land use, historic preservation, ecology, nature, what have you. And this is really saying that across all those topics, across all those interests that we all have as community leaders, as residents, as visitors, what have you, is these values cut across all those. And what they're really saying is, we want to retain the identity of the city of Atlanta, its full identity, by the way, that's inclusive identity, as we prepare for this change and really guide that change in the future. And we can do that by embracing these values. And I want you to remember that question about identity and progress. We'll talk about that more as we move through the presentation. But each of these you know, values has a description, not surprising. And I won't necessarily read these word for word, but there's, you know, 5 values and they have these descriptions go along with them. And equity is really the first one, and it really talks about how that there's fair access, nature, ambition, and progress to everybody who's involved in the city of Atlanta, who cares about the city of Atlanta. And that is not an easy task. In fact, we say here it's contentious, potentially, and it's often underappreciated or unappreciated. So, you know, and keep in mind that equity is not the same as equality. Equity is talking about how we focus on folks who have been left out of the conversation in the past, to bring that up to par with folks who are maybe already part of the conversation or already part of what they see as the future of the city of Atlanta. Progress. I think it's important thing to focus on here is that this is not, the word is not development. The word here is progress, which is talking about people and places that have meaning and how we can manage those market forces. You know, the private market is going to influence the city's future. How can we manage those forces so that we don't overrun the people and places that have meaning? And this is critically important as we talk about how city design has been implemented through some historic preservation work. But this is really not about development and growth. It's about progress in the more inclusive sense of the word. Ambition. How do we allow access to all the opportunities that exist in the city of Atlanta? And how do we really make that access fit the people's lives where they are and where they want to be? So it's not where we think folks should be going with their lives or with their communities, but, you know, how do we, if you will, get out of the way and make sure that those opportunities are available to folks where they need to be available. The fourth value is access, which deals with the physical idea of getting around the city of Atlanta, where we, of course, historically have been a hub for transportation from other places and going to other places. But we're also talking here about how within the city of Atlanta itself to build that transportation network, that access network, to be, of course, inclusive of all types of modes of transportation. There's lots of conversation about cars and trucks and vehicles in the city of Atlanta, but we're also talking, of course, about people walking, biking, and also providing access for folks who are mobility impaired, that they have that same equality of movement that the folks, everybody else has in the city of Atlanta. And I'd also add to make that sure that this is a seamless sense of transportation activity in the city of Atlanta. So while we have different potentially operators of transportation systems, some, MARTA and what have you, but that there's a logic to that system in that access so that it works for everybody. And the last value that's embodied in Atlanta city design is nature. And what's really interesting, if you think about the city of Atlanta's man-made development patterns, they are in often cases reflective of our watersheds, our creek and valleys in the city of Atlanta. And then not so much now, of course, is our forest canopy, which we are working with, as a Department of City Planning with our community folks and our advocates on how to deal with managing the city's forest canopy, but also our habitats as well. So if you think about the potential for the access to nature, which is really, to use a overused phrase, all around us, you think about the creeks that intertwine and go through our neighborhoods, the patches of older growth forests or open spaces in the city of Atlanta. They provide these combinations of spaces and these respite of places and spaces that are complementary to the more developed parts of the city of Atlanta. But it's really quite interesting because if you start to think about your neighborhood or your community or your part of the city of Atlanta, how there might be natural features that are right in the neighborhood, but they're not accessible. They're not maybe even safe to be around. But we can start to tie those things together. And all of this is, of course, to get to the overall concept of the Atlanta city design, which is the idea of the beloved community, which was described by Dr. Martin Luther King as this inclusive, forward-looking, progressive, beloved place for folks can live and work. So this results in the sort of composite image, if you will, you see here on the right, of what Atlanta city design is in a very sort of straightforward, somewhat simplistic way, in the sense of if you take these values and have them cut across these topics we all often talk about in our other conversations, what kind of a city do you have in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years? And what's interesting about Atlanta city design is that it is this vision document, but it does help break down how you get from that vision, from those core values to implementation. And it talks, and we're describing here in a sort of a graphic form, is how you do that. So you have this identity that can be supported by these 5 values. If you look at the urgency around those, and what do you do to make these things come to be, then how do you prepare a design for the city? In fact, if you go back to this is a design, if you will, for the city of Atlanta, just like you might design an individual project for a development. If you have that design, then what, if you will, more regular planning documents that we're used to talking about, how do they take those values, that identity, and that urgency and put them into manageable actions that can be used by city departments in the community and others who work with the city of Atlanta to bring this into fruition. So it's sort of set up as if you think about it, sort of how a project gets developed, you have your program and your values, you think about your implementation tools, and you think about how to get that all done. And so again, implementation here is really the next level of detail, the next level of activity. We roll up your sleeves to get into the nitty-gritty of how you get that done. And there are lots of activities that we're working on, some of which are part of our regular actions in the Department of City Planning, our zoning work, or work with the comprehensive development plan, transportation activity, our public space work with our Love Our Places program, for example. All of these pieces and parts can fit into these documents and these plans that then support and bolster that vision of Atlanta city design. And that involves, of course, city planning department, but also our elected officials, as well as all the folks, many of which are on this call, who are concerned about the future of the city of Atlanta. So, how do we operationalize Atlanta city design? Is probably the next it is the question we're dealing with now in the Department of City Planning, which is how we take this vision document and operationalize that, and at the same time reflect on that document. Is it in keeping with our current view of the city of Atlanta's future? Because like all of our planning documents you're familiar with, likely it needs to be checked in with over time to make sure it still reflects that vision. So one of the ways that we can implement Atlanta city design is through our historic preservation work. And that's what we want to talk about tonight. And so going back to our set of values, this is the quote about the progress, which is, as we begin to design our future, which is a purposeful activity, design our future, the intrinsic value of progress, not growth, but progress, is only realized when we stand up for people and places that have meaning. And let's keep in mind that the people and places that have meaning is an open question. And we'll talk about how that was grappled with both successfully and unsuccessfully through the Future Places Project, which was the city's really first comprehensive look at its historic preservation work in about 3.5, 4 decades. And this is a project I led when I was working more directly with the Historic Preservation Studio in the Office of Design. That studio is now led by Matt Adams, who is a longtime employee with the City of Atlanta, and I'll have his contact information at the end of the presentation, so you all can connect with him about more detailed questions you might have about some of these projects or even other projects that you might have heard about coming out of the Preservation Studio. But a Future Places project. So in short, the Future Places Project is an initiative by the City of Atlanta, and really particularly the Department of City Planning, to ensure that Atlanta retains its historic identity as it moves forward. This is a future-looking activity. But you'll see that word identity shows up again, which is how do we, if you will, keep Atlanta while we embrace our future in the change that is coming, whether we really want to try to keep it at bay or not. So we're retaining that historic identity as we move forward. And the name of the project is very purposeful. It is about future places that retain that identity. So we're looking to the future and drawing from our past to create those future places. So why would you do this project? Why would you take the time to sort of reflect on the city's historic preservation work? And here's a couple things that we came up with as a staff, and we shared much of this during the presentations about the Future Places project itself, which is there's a city brand, there's a city identity overall, which is new is better than old, shiny is better than not. And so people expect that the City of Atlanta is going to be always growing physically and removing its historic and old stuff. That's what we do in the City of Atlanta, right? That's our image. That's our, always on the move, always on the go kind of city. But that's only one view of the City of Atlanta's future. I mentioned already the last time we did this conversation was in the 1980s. There's the rapid pace of physical change that we're all familiar with in our neighborhoods and where we work and experience the City of Atlanta. We mentioned the implementation of Atlanta city design. This is one of several key components of that have been in the works for a couple of years. As you all know, probably better than anybody, the City of Atlanta's own actions impact historic places. We have lots of myths and facts that are out there about history and historic preservation that we try to address in the Future Places project. It's about the conversations and the approach to historic preservation, what role City of Atlanta's historic buildings and places have in its future, and also as a way to create a roadmap for the next 30 years. And I would note that all the images you see in this presentation are all in the City of Atlanta or reflect City of Atlanta Future Places project documents. So the historic images, the current day images, they're all in the City of Atlanta. So what was the Future Places project? For folks who were able to participate, this will seem familiar, but this is a great way to get folks up to speed on that. In short, we engaged the usual folks, plus we tried to add some new ones to the mix, and we'll talk about lessons learned in that regard. We did some survey work, sort of comparing a control set of folks who were not predisposed to talk about historic preservation to folks who came to our meetings who are already inclined to talk about the topic. So we could compare for the general public's view of historic preservation with the folks who are already interested in the topic. We collected information, did some mapping work. We did a peer city analysis looking at other cities. which is very interesting to see how our program stacks up to what other folks are doing. We did do some field work. We'll talk about that just a minute. We did a great in-depth study of the city parks system and how it reflects the city of Atlanta's history. We created what's called a story of Atlanta, which is not a history of Atlanta. It really tried to capture the themes of what we thought this history of Atlanta was. And then, as I said, a roadmap for what goes ahead. And more importantly, as you'll see tonight, it's an ongoing effort. So technically speaking, what do we get out of the Future Places project as far as things that you could read or things that you could touch? So we have a set of reports, so you can really dive in as far as you want. So we have a summary report, which really covers the highlights of the Future Places project. We had 5 in-depth technical reports and a call to action, which is what we'll talk mostly about tonight. You know, what do we do about this project? Project website, which is where all these documents live. We did not create a lot of physical copies of these documents. So if you go to atlfutureplaces.com, you'll see all of these documents. Some of them are quite lengthy reading, but they are really great bases of information for how to understand what this project was about. Created a project video, which we'll see at the end of this presentation. And then we also had some new branding and messaging about what historic preservation was about. Like I mentioned, the name was very purposefully selected to provide a more, we think, more open way to folks to embrace the topic. Just some quick examples of things we're not going to focus on tonight, but are part of the Future Places project experience. We talked about the history of the Parks Department and park land in the city of Atlanta. We identified 6 themes in that park history, which includes the 20th century Atlanta at play, civil rights activity, the influence of Frederick Law Olmsted and his company and firm on landscapes and parks in the city of Atlanta, how neighborhoods and parks develop together or sometimes in conflict with each other. Parks as sort of time capsules of the city of Atlanta history, and they contain sites and memorials in places where historic events occurred, and then how, in many cases, the city of Atlanta's parks were leftover space, how unusable space was turned into city of Atlanta parks, which has repercussions for their success today and really, you know, how they came to be. We also mentioned that peer city analysis. So these were the cities we focused on most particularly, although we gathered information from a much broader range of city of Atlanta's. So we looked at a whole series of components. We did, I should say, we mean the consultants we hired, did tabletop research as well as interviews with those historic preservation teams in those cities. Pulled out some best practices and some national models, and then made some recommendations for further research and ways to follow up on best practices in peer cities. We also mentioned some data gathering and windshield survey work, some map work. You'll see in the right hand, this is an image of the city of Atlanta in the neighborhoods in purple, were the neighborhoods that we're focused on. We did not try to recreate or reestablish information that was already known about neighborhoods. These were the neighborhoods where we could find the least amount of archival information about them, or we felt they had a lot of rapid change occurring in them. And we wanted to sort of check in with what had been prepared at some point in the past. So keep in mind the areas that are not in purple do have information about them in the possession of the city of Atlanta, through often other folks' documentation that we've collected. So it's not that they didn't have information already in place, but this was where we're trying to update that information in the neighborhoods that were in purple. So while that's what we had physically, as far as documents and deliverables and what could be on the website, the real question is, what do we really have now that we're done with the Future Places project, that initial focused effort? And frankly, we have some answers to the questions we raised during the process and we asked ourselves along the way, but we really have more questions, which is good because that means that there's still more work to be done and still more information to be gathered. We have some new and renewed partnerships that we established. It really became clear to the city staff that we could not do this on our own. And that meant both renewing partnerships we had before and seeking out some new ones when we could develop those. We have some ideas for new tools and techniques, both related to protection, incentivization of historic preservation, different programs we can run, our projects we can do. We'll talk more about those in a minute. So we certainly had new conversations, but we, as I said, more conversations to come, new priorities, and then we do have a basic roadmap for the next 30 years about at least what we should be focusing on for historic preservation. But we did learn a few lessons along the way. There's no question about that. And this is a quick summary of those lessons learned. Frankly, we did not expand the conversation enough about who's involved with this project in particular, but also after the project is done, quote unquote, who are we talking to about historic preservation in the city of Atlanta's history? We learned that we needed to increase the strength of the public-private partnerships. It's just not enough to know those organizations exist. It's not enough to occasionally get together with them. We really need to lean on each other to make historic preservation in the city of Atlanta's history, an integral part and a successful part of the city of Atlanta's future. We also learned, you probably know as much as I do, that we need to act with more urgency related to the city's historic places and spaces. And we need to do a better job of explaining what historic preservation is now, or what people think it is now, and what it can and should be in the future. I think it's fair to say that a lot of folks have an opinion about historic preservation that's not necessarily favorable. They think it's a very exclusive, growth suppressing activity. And in fact, we would argue, we, the preservation staff and the design staff and the planning staff, that it's actually an inclusive, future looking activity. We need to make sure that the folks at least have that opportunity to understand that when they're talking about what the future of their communities or their part of the city of Atlanta. We learned that even though we tried, we did not increase accessibility to the topic of the discussion very much. That's something that is desperately needed for a lot of planning activities, but particularly history and historic preservation. And then we also realized, sort of reinforcing our predisposed conclusion, that there are still barriers and divides about who's involved in the conversation about historic preservation and what is in fact historic. How do you have a conversation about the city's historic resources in the historic places and spaces in the future if there's not more folks involved in that conversation? So these are things that we are still working on as an Office of Design and the historic preservation staff in particular. And we hope that some of the work we have done as far as implementation is trying to get at some of these challenges and the lessons learned. As I mentioned earlier, there was a call to action. This is a very comprehensive list of recommendations that have been organized in a way that we hope is a little more approachable to folks who are not familiar with planning documents and preservation documents. So this is the categories of which these recommendations are slotted in the call to action. There is a printed copy of this. We have limited copies of that. This is all on the website, like I said, where you can look at these kind of topics and figure out how the recommendations might affect or be applicable to your interests in the city of Atlanta. All told, there's probably close to 100 recommendations that have been grouped into these categories. So we have started implementation of the Future Places project and really by extension, the Atlanta City Design through these 6 sort of buckets, if you will. And we're going to talk a little bit about all these for the rest of the presentation. So we've had increased in different types of designation activity since the Future Places project was adopted, and we'll talk about what's different about these designations as we go through each of those as a quick thumbnail summary. We have partnered with Historic Atlanta, Inc. on the first ever LGBTQ historic context statement for the city of Atlanta, one of the few in the entire country that will be created. We'll talk about what that means and what that is in just a minute. We've done some quick start implementation research. We have started Historic Preservation Week, which is in the fall coming up in October. We started the first ever Atlanta Cemetery Network. We've hired the city's first ever African American Heritage Coordinator. And that staff person's focus is on how to bring African American heritage and history to the forefront of, at a minimum, the Department of City Planning's work, and hopefully in a broader context with the city of Atlanta as a whole. So we're going to get into all of these topics a little more in depth for the rest of the presentation. So designation activity. So if folks aren't familiar with, the city of Atlanta has a zoning tool that allows the city of Atlanta to designate historic and landmark buildings and historic and landmark districts, which means there's a protection framework that goes along with that designation. So this is the historic preservation designation you're probably most familiar with. It, quote unquote, regulates the development with that property. And the line here you see is the designations that occurred prior to the adoption of the Future Places project, and then the ones below that are the ones subsequent to that adoption. You'll note that there's a pretty robust pace of activity related to that The Philadelphia School LBS will be finished by the end of this year, so that'll be 2 designations in 2022. And while the designations prior to the Future Places project were also pretty brisk, the most important thing to remember is that prior to that, there's only a handful of designations every couple years in the city of Atlanta. So we've really tried to step up our game in the game of the Office of Design to respond as much as we can to those kind of designation situations. So really quickly, I want to go through these designations that you might have heard about, maybe you're not, and just talk about why they're a little different and unique. The first one is a historic district in the Ponce Highland neighborhood. This is near Freedom Parkway, just off of Ponce Leon Avenue, bordered by Moreland on the east and Beltline on the west. It's a well-established neighborhood, but it really was struggling with how to manage its future activity. So what we did with this historic district is we tried to bring together all of the conversations about zoning, history, historic preservation, about future growth into a historic district package. So from this point forward, in Ponce Highlands case, the historic district is their development framework. And that historic district really uses these attributes. Now I want to point out a couple of things for you all's benefit here. One is the flexible nature of the Ponce Highlands Historic District. The neighborhood really wanted to make sure they were inclusive as far as what could be built in the neighborhood. So they have a contemporary design infill option in the Ponce Highlands Historic District. They have multiple options for how to add to residential buildings in the historic district. The other thing I want to focus on was the innovative characteristic listed here, and that is really basing as much of the neighborhood's future on this idea of the physicality, the form-based, the aesthetic, the architecture of the neighborhood's future. And then within that, looking at how uses and densities fit into that. The last thing I wanted to make a note about the grassroots aspect of this. This was a direct outcome of the Ponce Highlands master plan. It took some time to get there, but this was one of the things that was specifically called for in that master plan, which was predated the historic district initiative by about 10 years. But they did eventually get to that, implementing their own master plan along the way. So for folks who are in historic or landmark districts in the city of Atlanta or familiar with them, this will be a different kind of animal than you probably used to experiencing yourselves or having heard about in other neighborhoods in the city. So this is a new potential approach neighborhoods could take with trying to manage their future development. So let's talk about some individual designations. The first is the Atlanta Eagle building. This is on Ponce Leon Avenue. Officially, it's in the Midtown neighborhood, but you might note this building. It's in the 300 block of Ponce Leon Avenue. It's now currently not used building, but it was most recently occupied by the Atlanta Eagle nightclub and bar. And what makes this designation different than others in the past is that it's very much involves recent history. One of the most notable events associated with the Atlanta Eagle bar is a police action in the early 2000s. So that's less than 20 years old, but that's a really important part of this property's history. It was the first ever LGBTQ plus designated property in the city of Atlanta. That's its chief significance. And then, so that means its cultural significance is as important as its architectural significance. Now, lastly, this was a partnership with Historic Atlanta, Inc., who came to the city of Atlanta and advocated for this designation. All those are, in some ways, firsts for the city of Atlanta's historic preservation work. The companion designation to that was the Kodak building, which, as you might know, is right next door. Called that Kodak building because the iconic sign on top of the building itself. This is another example of a recent history activity. We're looking at mid-century, mid-20th century buildings and forward. This was a really interesting for me to learn about, although I don't live too far away and I'm familiar with the building, but its relationship to the hobby of photography and the business of photography stores in the city of Atlanta. So we got recent history. In this case, we have a community icon because of its signage. It is a reference point along Ponce Leon Avenue, and that in and of itself is worthy of consideration for designation. And then again, a partnership with Historic Atlanta, Inc. on bringing this LBS designation forward and helping facilitate that conversation. The next one I'm talking about is the Fuller Freedom House. This is in the Old Fourth Ward, just across the street from the Howard Middle School. Again, a beautiful building in its own right, but it's really important significance is related to the civil rights movement. This was what was called a Freedom House. It was used by SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, to have a place of refuge between their civil rights actions and activities. It also is associated with the Fuller family, which was a prominent family for African-American education and religious activity in the city of Atlanta and really the entire Southeast. We could spend all night just talking about this property among all these others for that matter. So its connection and significance is as much history as it is architecture. This building has been altered over time. We could talk to some about that at some other time, but it retains its identity and its integrity enough to really tell that story of the civil rights activity, the educational religious activity. Interestingly enough, the property owner came to us with questions about their history of their property, and we helped answer those questions and help facilitate this being a protected building from this point forward. I would note there are numerous civil rights related buildings in the city of Atlanta that are likely unknown to most of the general public, myself included, frankly, and they don't, quote, look like civil rights buildings. They look like regular buildings, and that's what this kind of a building was. It is not unlike the other buildings that are right next door to it on the street. This property also is associated with, I would just note, with John Lewis and Stokely Carmichael, among other folks. Both use this building as part of their work with SNCC. Our next building is in Southwest Atlanta. That's the Masonic building in the Capitol View neighborhood. It's 1331 Metropolitan Parkway. Folks are probably more familiar with this building as being one of the largest buildings in Southwest Atlanta at the corner of Dale and Metropolitan. Again, fascinating history. This was a proactive designation. We were concerned about the building's future. And it also has, again, lesser recognized civil rights movement activity. This was the site, if you can see in this lower right-hand picture, of the Postal and Federal Employees Union, which started out originally as a way to advocate for African-American postal workers who were not able to join the whites-only union for federal postal workers at that time. Is also the site of the Masonic chapter for that part of the city of Atlanta. So this is a specific design, a building specifically designed for Masonic use, which is why it has that unusual window pattern on the upper 2 floors. That's where the Masons held their meetings and activities. And then it's a community icon, and I said it's a proactive designation. So again, features of this building and the significance of its history. Again, some of these were the first time we had recognized those in LBS, or landmark building or site designation. Ormond Avenue Bridge. This is in Southeast Atlanta. This is the bridge, the railroad bridge between the Ormond Park and Grant Park neighborhoods. Also interesting because it is the first time the city of Atlanta had designated singularly a piece of infrastructure as a historic or landmark place or space. It's also the first individual piece of railroad history we designated in the city of Atlanta, and the first transportation only history or element of that history we've designated. So Atlanta was founded on its railroad and transportation infrastructure, but this is the first time we've called that out as a singular piece of Atlanta history. This has a great architectural and engineering background too, but we'll save that for another time period. The bridge is one of the probably oldest pieces of standing infrastructure in the city of Atlanta that we still have with us today. And this was also a partnership with another advocacy organization in the city of Atlanta, the Atlanta Preservation Center, who facilitated this work and brought this to us as an important initiative. The Smith Farm landmark building or site. This is at the Atlanta History Center. Some of you probably went maybe as children or as adults or school groups or community groups, what have you. Also interesting because, as some of you all might know, these are mostly relocated in newer buildings. So this is an example of buildings having historic significance after their original life. So the buildings were relocated from disparate parts of Metro Atlanta, but their real history and why we felt it was considered to be worthy of landmark building or site designation is its educational and community history as a gathering place, as an educational space in the city of Atlanta, beyond the pure history of the buildings themselves. And that's unusual in the historic preservation field, to sort of have that second life obtain its own significance and importance to the community. Also partnership this time with the Atlanta History Center. The next thing I want to talk about is the LGBTQ historic context statement. So often people ask, what is a historic context statement? Well, it's a great historic preservation jargon for a report that sort of formalizes the history of the places and spaces associated with that topic in the city of Atlanta. It's being prepared again in partnership with Historic Atlanta Inc. In fact, I would note that without Historic Atlanta Inc.'s leadership, this would not be happening. So they've raised the matching funds for the grant. They are assisting with the project management and really taking the lead on different aspects of that project. And the city of Atlanta is focusing on other parts of it as well. It will identify LGBTQ plus places and spaces in the city of Atlanta, many of which are in danger of being lost. And as I mentioned earlier, this would be one of the few such research projects in the entire United States, and really the only one of its scale in the Southeastern United States for sure. So this historic context statement is like, what will that do for the city of Atlanta and advocacy organizations? It'll be, as the most basic, the first step to recognize and preserve these spaces. How do we know what we're talking about if we don't know what we're talking about? You know, what is out there that's associated with the topic in the city of Atlanta's history so that we can do something about it, whatever is the most appropriate for those places and spaces. You know, identify, evaluate them, potentially protect them. How do we get them listed on the Georgia National Register of Historic Places, which opens them up for economic opportunities and incentives. Then also, how do we consider them for designation under the city of Atlanta's historic preservation ordinance? You know, what do we do about them now that we know something about them? I think this will be a fascinating piece of the city of Atlanta's history to bring to the broader public, for folks who might not be familiar with it already. Most recently, we had an event at the Outfront Theater on the west side of Atlanta on Brady Avenue, which was a community conversation about LGBTQ history. We had a moderated panel discussion, and it was a great first step. And we really learned a lot about how to maybe have more of these forums in the future, you know, about this topic. And as part of that research, the team that's working on that, which is a consultant team that was hired by Historic Atlanta, has identified these sort of general themes for LGBTQ history in the city of Atlanta. Probably not too surprising for most folks, but this is how that story is going to be organized and how to create that narrative that folks can sort of embrace that and learn about that. Then lastly, we have you know, an email address and a project website. It's part of the Future Places project website. We can learn much more about this project. And most importantly, through an email, sign up to tell us a story through an old history program we're going to start up in the spring, or share a photograph or information you might have with the project team. We're well aware of the fact that this is not the first time this has been undertaken. In fact, there's groups already in the city of Atlanta who have created archives and created part of that narrative. We're just trying to, among other things, pull that together so that we can have, at least from the city of Atlanta's perspective, sort of a more formalized documentation of that history. But we are really looking forward to what comes after this project. The project officially ends, the research work officially ends in December of this year, but that just is the beginning of all sorts of great activities that we have in mind for the coming years regarding that. Then I want to touch base real quickly on some quick start implementation research. Last summer, we did some preliminary analysis of these topics. These are all recommendations in the Future Places project. And so we have, you know, sort of the starting block for all these topics. And some of them we're advancing even more today, including the designation toolkit and the oral history program. We're getting ready to roll that out hopefully in the near future. So with all of these, we have some base information on that we can help use going forward as we have the time and manpower to get to those. And you'll hear more about these hopefully in the coming year, some of these as well. I mentioned earlier Historic Preservation Week. As folks might be familiar, in May of each year, we typically have the Design Awards, which coincides with National Preservation Month. And this is a way to bookend that about a half year later with another conversation about historic preservation in the city of Atlanta. This is the 2020 program, which was the first time we'd done Historic Preservation Week. This was the 2021 program. And it's usually a couple sessions. These were all virtual, given the pandemic response the city of Atlanta had. And this year's event, which will be the third week in October, we'll have some in-person events. So please stay tuned. If you follow the department's social media work, we'll also be rolling this out as much as we can to our NPU contacts. and others who are part of our sort of office design mailing list, if you will. This will be a week's worth of events as well. We're partnering with some of our other groups to have some more interactive field visit kind of events as well. So again, another way, hopefully, to expand that conversation about what historic preservation can be if it's not what folks think it is right now. I want to talk a little bit about the Atlanta Cemetery Network, another recommendation out of the Future Places project. We, of course, have a groovy logo there. But why would you have a network? So we can study cemetery organizations, we can understand who's invested in cemeteries, what are options for care, what are the challenges they face, and how do we understand what is possible for cemeteries beyond their, if you will, prescribed original function, which was to inter folks and loved ones, people, friends, family who had died in the city of Atlanta. But that's just really the starting point about the value and the role they can play in communities. What are the potential goals of the cemetery network? This is being refined as we speak because we've already started the discussions about what the network can be. But creating tools for caring about cemeteries, exchanging knowledge and information, promoting cemeteries as crucial cultural spaces. They have roles in their community. They have roles in the city of Atlanta's future beyond even those that are static, that are not being actively used. They have more than just that interment act, that interment role. A gathering space for conversations for folks who are concerned about cemeteries. We think it's really interesting that they serve multiple roles in their communities, and that means different kind of folks might be interested in their future. And then focus attention on African American burial grounds in particular in the city of Atlanta, again, keeping with this idea of elevating that topic through the African American Heritage Coordinator. Just real quick, what do we know about cemeteries in the city of Atlanta? This has all been part of the research that's been gathered initially on this project. We know there's at least 80 burial grounds in the city of Atlanta, and the vast majority of those are smaller than 1 acre, and at least 30 of those are considered abandoned or in poor condition. The most common cemetery type in the city of Atlanta is what's called the Pioneer Cemetery, i.e. Europeans first settling the Piedmont region of this part of the state of Georgia. And those are often family or small church cemeteries. Those are by far the most numerous in the city of Atlanta. We also know that most cemeteries have uncertain ownership, either because the group that did have ownership interest is now dissolved or defunct or is unable to be contacted. And then, of course, because of that, they have suffered from vandalism and neglect. And all those things can be addressed through collaborative effort among folks who are concerned about cemeteries in the city of Atlanta. So as I mentioned, we have this 82, which I think that number has actually gone up since then. All of but 4 MPUs in the city of Atlanta have burial grounds in them. 62 neighborhoods have burial grounds in them. That's of about 250 official neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta. The highest concentration of cemeteries is in MPUs G and J in Northwest Atlanta. In Grove Park, the neighborhood of Grove Park has the most cemeteries, with 5 just in that neighborhood alone. So it's very interesting to see their distribution if you were to plot them out individually, how they relate to the communities that that developed around them. But they're really all over the city of Atlanta. And then a potential work program. This is definitely being fleshed out as we talk. Identify, research, access, share, protect resources, highlighting cemeteries, and then involving folks in that conversation. So the question then is what is city design about if you think about it through a historic preservation lens? And these are the kinds of things, these are the kind of words that we can use to talk about city design, to talk about identity, to talk about history in the city of Atlanta. So think about how, when you're talking about history or historic preservation, what is the broader dialogue that can occur? How can that conversation be conveyed to folks in a way that makes them understand or help them understand that it's part of their future and their community's future and the parts that they're concerned about? And it's not just about the architecture. It's not just about individual buildings. It's about these things. It's about action, future, identity, meaning, people, and places. So that's I think the biggest takeaway is, if you look back to Atlanta city design, It's as much about the values that we embrace in the city of Atlanta, in that identity, as it is the actual physical things that are used to implement those values and to reflect those values. So that's the Future Places project. You can see the website there, atlfutureplaces.com. And then I wanted to lastly share my contact information and Matt Adams' contact information. He is managing the historic tradition part of the Office of Design now. So if you have specific questions about historic tradition programs or projects, he can answer those as well. So before we get into the Q&A, I'd like to stop sharing my screen and have Samantha share our project video to help you get excited about historic tradition in the city of Atlanta. Samantha?
I am pulling it up. Everyone give me 1 or 2 seconds. My computer cannot function at the same time with everything running. Screen.
The story of our city is written in the foundations. On the land of the Cherokee and the Muskogee Creek people, inscribed inside the railroad tracks, a city built by the enslaved, the indigenous, and the immigrant, the song of our city.
Am I frozen or is it Samantha?
I think it was paused. But I do know that it's difficult to share the video.
So Sam, if you'll send me the link, I can share it because I seem to have a good signal at the moment. If you want to send me the link.
Blessed be. I will do that. See?
To the project website, atlfutureplaces.com, and it's the opening screen. So that's a good way to check it out yourself as well.
Blueprints and red lines and trolley tracks and bus
I don't know what's happening.
lines and guitar.
Lee, are we ready for Q&A?
I think we are probably ready for Q&A. I'm waiting on the video to appear in my inbox, the link.
Got it.
Hey.
Okay. All righty. And it is loading. One moment, please.
Hey guys, welcome to Forward. We're a new type of doctor's office that's providing preventative primary care. We've got world-class doctors supported by the most advanced medical technology. Now, one of the really cool things about Forward
All righty. Share sound, share video, share it all. Thank you guys so much for your patience.
The story of our city is written in the foundations. On the land of the Cherokee and the Muskogee Creek people, inscribed inside the railroad tracks, a city built by the enslaved, the indigenous, and the immigrant, the song of our city. lives in the narrative of our neighborhoods, in blueprints and red lines, in trolley tracks and bus lines, in guitar riffs and bass lines. Can we tune in to the rhythm of our city? The heart of our city is found at the corner of struggle and success, how our city is the birthplace of movements for civil rights, for freedom, for inclusion, for all we've achieved, for all we have yet to accomplish. The soul of our city can be found in its buildings, lingering in the very bricks and mortar, how the walls of our historic places speak out to tell us their journey. Will we listen to the sound of our city? The legacy of our city lives in the leadership of our elders, lives in the place where what was then meets now and what can be. We want to honor our roots because our history is our future. Will you help us uphold Atlanta's future places?
So if you all have any questions, this would be the time to use the raise hand option. Jacob Mills, go right ahead.
Hey, yes, I just want to say, Doug, thank you very much for your presentation. I did miss a little bit of it in the beginning, just on a prior meeting. But I am the Chosewood Park Neighborhood Association chairman, and we have a lot of new developments that are coming into our neighborhood. We don't necessarily have historical zonings and designations on it. Really, many of our buildings, or really any of the stuff over here, other than maybe our federal penitentiary. But we do have, cemeteries that are involved here that I would like to maybe continue having some discussions with, your group regarding. But I think some of our biggest issues that we're running into right now is right now we have a single family core neighborhood of around 360 houses. And we have most of our neighborhood falls within the Beltline overlay and the tax allocation district involved with that. And so we also have the opportunity tax zone, which is a big part of our neighborhood. So what we are getting right now is developers that are coming in, and unfortunately lenders are the ones that are kind of dictating what will be built. And so I am looking for some maybe direction, or maybe if this is a conversation we might need to kind of continue maybe offline, on how we can help protect our legacy residents within our community, and also how we can help with our infrastructure that we are going to be dealing with. We have, like I said, about 360 plus single family housing units here in Chosewood. But right now we have already been approved for over 5,000 rental units over the next 24 months to be built in our neighborhood. So we're very concerned about stormwater collection. We're very concerned about pedestrian pathways, safe connectivity throughout our neighborhood, and also how we would be able to incentivize developers to give us better fenestrations and exteriors onto our buildings and new structures that are coming, because we do not have any kind of historical zoning designation. And so we kind of continue to get the same designs from each individual developer regarding, those exterior facades. So is there any kind of insight, or is this a conversation that is much longer than just answering a couple questions? And I don't want to hold everyone up here, regarding that, but we've got a lot of pressure on us as the neighborhood leadership to help, figure out ways to better our schools, figure out ways to better our infrastructure, and to how to have affordable housing within our neighborhood.
Sure. I do think it's a conversation that we could start in another venue, but one of the interesting things you mentioned about that is I think a concern that probably occurs in other neighborhoods as well, with maybe different degrees of scope or scale, but my email address is dyoung@atlantaga.gov. So I think let's connect, Jacob, some other point and talk more about that. I think there'll be other folks who could be involved in that conversation in our Office of Zoning and Development, for example, who would have been doing the reviews of those projects. So we definitely can touch base on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Young.
Sure.
Tracy Sims, if you want to go ahead.
Hi,
there.
my name is Tracy, and I work for City of Refuge on the west side of Atlanta on Boone. But I grew up in the Hunter Hill community.
Yep.
They purchased a piece of property at 345 Chapel Road, and it was the Dancing Hotel. And I remember it from when I was young, but it was one of the first Black hotels for Blacks in the city. We would like to preserve that history in the building, but we cannot find pictures, information. I did go down to the Apex Museum, and the only thing I found was an ad for a maid or a cook, but there's no information, and I don't know where to go to. We like for that history to be represented, because it is a part of the and it's a part of the community. Like I said, I remember it when I was growing up. I grew up on Burbank, so that was a big thing then back in the 60s. We had but there it seems to be, I don't know where to turn to get that history information on it.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great building. I'm generally familiar with your project and a little bit about how it came to be. But yeah, we can probably provide some tips on how to do that, or maybe do a quick with folks on our team from the historical preservation team, maybe try to dig a little deeper to get you started on that. So again, dyoung@atlantaga.gov, and I'll connect you, or Matt's email address, but you can just start with mine. It's a little easier to remember.
Okay.
And then we'll figure out how we can maybe dig some information on that.
I'll email you tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess I'm next in line.
Yes,
My name's Nick Nicholson, and I live in the high-rise section of Midtown. My question is, at first, I love your presentation. I've worked with the city in the past because I love to hear the planning and what goes into it. I've also been a neighborhood rep for quite a few years in various neighborhoods, and I always feel like the wrong people are hearing your presentations, and the people who need to know about them are the developers, and they haven't learned this. And so we naturally start running into conflict, and it lots of times comes down to money. And so my question is, how are you or the city of Atlanta able to defend the book that you've put together? How can you defend that and get that written into code for what I call sort of esoteric things, which I believe in, but when you put dollars and cents to it, it doesn't shake out as well.
Yeah, great questions. This is fantastic. So I talked today about the Future Places project as one sort of channel of implementing Atlanta city design, and there's others that have already been talked about and even implemented. So I think one of the key considerations for how to take those principles and make them affect development is through the zoning rewrite. And so the workshops are going to be rescheduled, as you might have heard. But I think that the way that conversation is going to be managed will be really helpful to figure out, these ideas that probably most of the folks on this call, yourself, embrace, can get put into, things that have teeth. So I think that's a real critical way. The other thing that is important to pay attention to, I think, is the city's transportation project management. And not so much what the city does itself, but how other agencies are working with the city of Atlanta so that we get the transportation investments we need and that reflect the city of Atlanta's interests and its residents and property owners' interests and folks who care about the city of Atlanta, so that we don't have regional solutions affecting communities adversely, when in fact we need community solutions, for example, in those kind of situations. So those are the things that off the top of my head I would note. In the Office of Zoning Development is managing that zoning rewrite. The sort of companion piece of that will be the update of the comprehensive development plan, which will come out of the office that I manage now. And those teams are already working closely to make sure that that all is in sync, going forward.
Mrs. Brooks.
I'll just echo Nick and say this was a great presentation, and I've been writing down notes. Right at the beginning, when you were talking about core values, what came to mind to me as I look at recent projects by, I guess, the Atlanta Design Studio, that they have that as the foundation of the planning. And then when it comes to implementation, a lot of it gets lost in translation. So you use the term operationalize, and I think that is key when you understand what the values are, and the values are exactly what we need. But then, like, is there a custodian of those values? Is there someone to assess during the operationalizing phase to see if the values are actually respected?
Yeah.
And what course could there be?
Sure. You mentioned the also design projects, but I suspect you might be talking about larger planning activities as well. One of the things that and I've, as I mentioned before, I've been with the city of Atlanta for some time. In generally the roles of historic preservation, design, urban design kind of functionality. And I think it's fair to say that we have to both convince folks, to Mr. Nicholson's point, outside who are not the ones who come on these calls, for example, or most likely not on these calls, but also the folks that I work with. So that the city design ethos, or as it gets revised potentially in the future, frankly, that is in fact the all-encompassing vision. So in the city of Atlanta, you have what are called the operating departments, if you will, the ones that do things that affect communities. You have transportation, you have planning, you have watershed, those kind of folks. And I think with the CDP update and things that go along with that, including the capital improvements program discussion, that's another vehicle to say that those values can be embodied in these projects. They can there might be one or two values, or they could be all the values, whatever the case may be. But the city design sort of rests on top of those other things, and I think it's fair to say that we have to do a better job of getting that set of 5 words in with these other departments. I mean, there's no other way of saying that. And as the current interim director of the Office of Design, that's one of my things to do, and the folks that work with me. So it's a challenge, and we've actually recently had conversations ourselves about how to respond to that, because we realize that we don't want to keep just treading water, which is maybe what some folks think is happening now. So we're definitely have some of the same thoughts.
Okay, well, thank you very much for paying attention to that, because it's a worry.
Oh, yes.
Thanks.
Yes. And I would be interested to hear, we can do this offline, is some of the projects you think that might have missed the mark, because that'll help us if another kind of project like that comes forward in the future. Like, what did we learn from last time? Because that's one of the things that is very concrete ways to say, well, we hit the mark here but not there, and why was that? Because folks, myself included, we all have lots to do, and it's like, well, what are some very specific things we can do differently potentially in the future? So that'd be great to hear that feedback from you, or maybe your community group, if there's wherever you live, or whatever you're concerned about.
Ms. Chandra Jones Foster.
Yes, I live in Southwest Atlanta, and much to a similar concern that Mr. Mills had with the amount of rental property that's coming into the area. the neighborhood traditionally, when you're speaking of preserving, has been owner occupied for the most part. Now you have a lot of investors coming in, bringing in multifamily kind of rentals, and it just changes the character. And, you know, if you want people that care and are concerned about the neighborhood, you want to have a controlled mix of that so that you don't lose the character of the neighborhood. And so just wanted some of your ideas or some of your thoughts about how does the city manage that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it actually comes up a fair amount around the city of Atlanta. I will say I have two sort of responses to that. One is the city has a very limited ability about the ownership structure of the buildings and the properties. I'm not aware of a tool that can prevent rental property from being built. There are a variety of tools that relate to the physical form of the buildings that has to do with zoning and development controls, and even potentially the design controls if you're in an area that could support a district of some kind or another. But I'm not aware of a tool that allows the city to manage the ownership of the building or unit itself. You can talk about whether it should be an apartment, a house, a townhouse, you know, garden style apartments, whatever it is. But the ownership structure is something that I'm not aware that the city can, at least at this time, get into. But we certainly can talk about the size, location, look, feel, you know, those kind of things, which is at least sometimes part of the conversation.
But as you reach the neighborhood, as you rezone traditional single family neighborhoods and allow larger multifamily, you know, those are going to be rental. So just allowing that changes the, I guess, the nature. I'm not asking the city, you know, naturally you can't be draconian, but in terms of just strategically how you allow or change, I guess that's part of what you were saying with the zoning rewrite, that you can help manage that. And I just wanted your thoughts on, or if you even had any ideas in terms of going forward, how you manage that so that you don't really change the whole structure of neighborhoods. Some of the newer developments have homeowners associations, so they have their own protections. It's the older, more established neighborhoods where you are trying to preserve the historical value of it that don't have those protections from having an association that dictates what happens. And you're kind of at the mercy of really zoning and what is allowed in your area, and you have no say.
Yeah, one of the things we could do is we could connect later on. I don't know if you're have folks in your area that are in talks or have talked with the also zoning development that manages the zoning rezonings that come along. But I can certainly connect you with them and how those rezonings were evaluated, what MPU and community input was gathered, because all the rezonings would have gone, you know, of course, to the MPU. And I know that's not a perfect system, but it is the vehicle we use. So let's connect. You can get my email dyoung@atlantaga.gov, and we can talk more about that.
Yeah, I attend the MPU meeting, so I do know about those, but I'm really looking long term as all of these changes are being implemented. You know, I don't even know how the MPU fits into the new zoning that they're proposing. So there's just a lot of. But
there's a lot of discussions on the table, that's for sure. And as a department, we'll be asking a lot of the folks on this call, among others, to help us make sure we do the right thing by the city of Atlanta and by the communities we serve, because there'll be lots of things to be discussed in the next year, 2 years.
Also, just a reminder, all questions must be relevant to the course content. So I think we'll go ahead and take Ms. Carla Calsey. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate it. like everyone else, just want to echo, Doug, it's good to see you again, and I was looking forward to this presentation. I've worked with East Atlanta the Community Association. I'm the chair of land use and zoning with that community. As you know, we've gone through a lot of challenges, if you will, and we recently received our National Registry designation last year, although we had it for the for the state. My question is, two questions are kind of wrapped together, so I was trying to put them all together to be a little more concise. One of the questions I had dealt with, you said under the Office of Design, there's historic planning and public spaces. Kind of more interested, I think, in planning, but it could be public spaces, so you have to correct me. What we are doing, at least in our community, we're working to put together a master plan that takes us through the next 30 or so years that coincides with the city. And a big concern that I have is that with my development partners that come into the area, is that in preserving some of these historic places like our cemeteries, our trails and the paths and things like that, what would be the best type of development to go around that situation? So if I have a historic path or a historic battle or a cemetery area, but there is developable and buildable land surrounding it, what would be the best type of development that would be sustainable for the area? Is that like that we have different ideas about what would go there, what would not go there nicely and neatly fit within the community and that kind of thing, some assistance with that. I don't know if the planning studio helps with that with communities, because we are looking to grow, we want to have more density, but don't want to diminish the value of the designation. And the second question of it is that earlier on the slide that was purple, forgive me, I was trying to write down the name of it, but you had it was a survey, and you had the purple areas designated as the areas that were included in the future spaces. And I wanted to know, because I really didn't see a lot of purple for me, is that how do we get included in this to make sure that we're listed in here as well?
So great. On the first question, do you know if the folks on your team for the master plan have already connected with our planning studio at all? And the planners that work there?
I have not. I have on my team, I have like 5 people right now, and we've been working on setting our baseline where we are to know where we'd like to go. But I've heard a lot about the city planning studio, but I have not included them just yet.
Okay, well then we can certainly connect on that and figure out where there might be a fit and at least help provide some insight for you all. So again, let's connect and figure out where that interrelationship could be. The second question was about the slide with the purple map. So just to be clear, that map does not show the neighborhoods that were included in the Future Places project. What that map shows is we were trying to supplement neighborhoods where we didn't know a lot about. So for example, in East Atlanta, because you're already in the National Register of Historic Places, we didn't need to re-research that neighborhood. So the Future Places project covers the whole city of Atlanta, but those were the neighborhoods where we did a little bit of field work to figure out what's happened recently there, because we didn't have a lot of information already. So it wasn't being in or out, it was just a question where we did that survey work. We're very well aware of East Atlanta's National Register nomination and how that captured that history. So there are other resources, we didn't share them here, but we did, for example, map all the National Register districts in the city of Atlanta, which would, I guess it might have been about the time that the National Register was finalized for East Atlanta, but at the time we did the map, whoever was already listed was on that map. And if you look at the mapping and geography report on the website, you'll see the maps I'm talking about that would be probably more descriptive, frankly, than what I showed tonight.
Thank you.
All right, Miss Alita Silverman, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for doing this program. I live in one of the city's designated neighborhood districts. And I was very encouraged to read the Atlanta City Design a couple of years ago. Very, very fine document, I thought, and it's very hopeful to read something like that. And then last year, a couple of things happened that were really very distressing to see. And I am going to tie this to historic preservation, but there was a vote by the city council in direct violation of the city design document. And after all, the city council was the body that adopted that document. And I believe Doug Young called it a vision document. And yes, certainly it is. But I've also seen it described as a document meant to be the guide to the city's comprehensive development plan, which means that it's really all about planning for the city and what your department and section do. So the other very discouraging event was a proposal, in fact, put forward by the Department of Planning that really was a direct violation of what the city design says about growth areas versus conservation areas. And for a lot of us, especially in these designated historic and landmark neighborhoods, it was a direct assault on us, even though it affected not every one of us, but certainly some of us, like West End on the west side and Candler Park on the east side. And that was the proposal that you could densify within half a mile of MARTA stations. Fortunately, that didn't go anywhere, but who knows? So I was really taken aback and discouraged. And I guess my question has to do with, yes, I mean, this is about future places and historic preservation and the benefits of it and winning people over so that they really understand what preservation means. But how do you take what happened last year vis-a-vis the city design document?
The first action you mentioned, you said a vote by city council. What vote are you referring to?
The vote to take acreage for the, I guess it's the Atlanta Police Training Facility, smack dab in the middle of what was set aside as preserved green space. And it's just breathtaking.
Yeah, my comment would be that the city council didn't agree with Atlanta City Design in that regard. And I'm not going to try to speak for the city council.
Well, that's very prudent of you, but and I realize that you probably can't honestly answer that question. But what about the other?
Being the housing proposal from last fall, is that what you're talking about?
Well, I'm sure it has a very catchy name. I just don't remember it.
Yeah, no, that's what I want to see. Yeah, so my thought is that was a idea to try to address adding some density to neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta. But I have to say that, it wasn't well received. And as a result, it was not moved forward by the department. I think the zoning rewrite is going to explore this question of how to have form be retained in neighborhoods that's important to them. But the housing proposal was jettisoned, and that was in response to folks like you on the call.
All right, I'm going to put you out of your misery. Thanks very much.
Nicole, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, go ahead.
Hey, so like Jacob, we were actually on a call with the developer So unfortunately I was a little late. So I was wondering about if you had any best practices when it came to really enforcing and implementing the rezoning and like the CDPs that we have for our community and for our MPU. We're an MPUI, and Chosewood Park does have its own doctrine as well as and it seems that being that we're in that way, and actually that mostly helps us, but the tax incentive tax credits that we have here for the area does inhibit us really forcing or incorporating what's in our CDP. And what is the best way to kind of make sure that we're able to get developers to follow that?
So you cut out a little bit there in the middle of the call. So I think I got almost everything. I think the first sort of part of the question was about, I guess, when rezonings occur, how to make sure that the resulting project follows the rezoning. Was that sort of the first part?
To follow our CDP, to follow what our community wants to see to be built and what to incorporate in their build.
Okay, so the CDP gets its teeth through the zoning that applies. You know this already. So if those properties required rezonings to be built, and I'm not familiar with the projects in Chosewood Park by any means, but if those rezonings had conditions associated with them about their design or how they were arranged in the property, those would go forward and they would be enforced by the Office of Zoning Development, who would review the plans that would come in that relate to that rezoning. If the Chosewood Park's part of the CDP has, for example, proposed land uses, or densities that are not in the current zoning that is on the ground for the neighborhood, that needs to be taken care of, I guess is the best way to put it. Because the CDP itself gives you, and you probably know this, but gives you that land use framework, but it's the zoning that actually tells you what you can do with the property, presumably in concert with that. If not, it needs to be changed to match up with that.
Okay, so I think that like in our situation, we had a massive rezoning to get a lot of from the industrial to the MR3 and MRC type of lots, which has allowed a lot of these developers to come in and just build whatever they want because they don't have to get an SAP, they don't have to rezone or anything, but it goes against what the community wants built and what our CDP does have. So is there an option then to have maybe through these workshops or anything to continue to down zone some of these lots so that it allows for a broader range of build options to where these developers would have to actually come and get a rezoning?
The short answer is I'm not sure because I'm not familiar with how the master zoning you referred to, how that occurred, like why that occurred. I would probably have you connect with me and the director of the Office of Zoning Development, who would have presumably been involved with that rezoning work along the way. I just don't have enough familiarity with why that came to be to know what would be different about it in the future. I'm sorry about that.
I can shoot you an email and hopefully we can resolve
Okay.
that. Last question, and probably is more for Samantha. The zoning rewrite workshop and the city transportation workshop, is that something that's through MPU or is that another way to find those workshops to attend?
That's zoning rewrite is not through MPU University, but I can find out for you. Just email me and I can get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Miss Melissa Baker.
Thanks, Samantha. I appreciate that. Doug, I just had a quick question for you, and I appreciate your talk tonight. I wanted to know if you could give any particular advice about how to get like city planners and designers and city council members and investors interested in sort of like progressing like growth, and I know you don't like the word development, but development in like marginalized communities that may have blight, but have open spaces, especially open green spaces that are owned by the city that are unused. And like, does the actual zoning rewrite or the planning studio like address any of these particular issues implicitly?
So the city open spaces you're referring to, are those parks or land that's used to have something else on it, I guess, is the question.
Have nothing on it.
Okay. But they didn't have anything on it before. Okay. So I'm not sure what neighborhood you're referring to in the city of Atlanta, but I can mostly speak for the city staff because that's the folks that I work with. I don't know what neighborhood you're or part of the city you're concerned about, but
I'm in NQZ and I'm a part of the pool, the Blair Villa in Pool Creek.
Okay.
Orchard Knob.
Okay.
Area.
Do you, you said MPUV as in Victor?
Z.
That's what I thought. Okay. Yeah. So do you know if MPUZ has had any planning work done in the past that would be akin to a master plan, or any corridor studies that involve, like, for example, Jonesboro Road, or anything that would be nearby that might be sort of a building block for that? The CDP update and the zoning rewrite update will address, of course, all the neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta. The city council member, you have to speak directly with them about why their interests are not in the neighborhood, frankly. I'm really intrigued about this question of the city, the city-owned undeveloped parcels and what those are, because again, it'd be great to hear more about that in detail, maybe as a follow-up, because there is a group in the Office of Housing and Community Development looking at what to do with city land. And I don't know if that's part of, if they're aware of that, or if that's some other kind of property that is, maybe it's owned by a watershed, I don't know, but we can definitely figure out where that might lie in that conversation.
It is by a watershed.
Okay.
It is close to the South River tributary. And it is off of Jonesboro Road. And a lot of that land is City of Atlanta land that is unused.
I know that some watershed management owned property was bought to not be developed. I don't know if that's the case with this or not, but we could certainly figure that out. I think just more information and we can figure out who might be involved in that conversation would be helpful.
Okay, I could shoot you an email. Thanks, Doug.
Sure.
And Robin, I think you're going to be our last question before we go out, or comment. Go for it.
Okay, I just had an idea in listening to all of this. Is there any thought with the zoning development planning and such like that to ensure that as buildings get built, to put into the new zoning regulations that some sort of group review the historic history of each building that goes in before they get approval? So therefore this becomes, what you're doing now as an aspiration becomes something that is part of the zoning rules and laws. So therefore we preserve all our history by having that review.
You're talking about like before they get approved to be built, for example?
Yeah, before they get approved as part of the zoning for any community, because we can't know the history of every single property or have somebody interested until it happens. And when something happens, for example, I live in Viewpoint and there was a building on the side that near the end of that was on part of this property that they wanted to preserve, and it became a big brouhaha. And it happens often in Midtown because there is focus on it, at least with discussions, but it becomes something that has to be approved by zoning before something gets torn down, where buildings that are historic, that becomes part of the zoning requirements rather than something that's there.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. In the actual Future Places project recommendations, one of the recommendations is to have a more comprehensive view of proposals for demolitions in the city of Atlanta outside the official designation process. I will say that'll be very significant lift for the city of Atlanta. It would be a radical change in the way we think about reviewing development, but it's worth bringing up in the zoning rewrite, for example. There might be more folks concerned about that than we know.
It also could help developers because sometimes they buy or they start on properties and then there's holdups for months or years which can cost the developers, whereas if it was part of the process, it wouldn't be part of it because it would be able to be considered before they even go through their zoning and they start.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of information that the city of Atlanta knows about its historic places and spaces. It almost in some ways too much to help sort of convey and organize in an orderly fashion, but that's one of the things that we need to figure out, which is, at least as an information sharing perspective, how do we make that information more readily available to people? Is there some sort of mechanism, sort of a mapping tool that we could say, for example, these are just where the old buildings are, let alone whether they're significant, just they're the old buildings, just as a starting point, for example. And is there a way to convey that and explain that, that folks can approach that conversation? Getting ahead of what happens to property is like the gold standard for preservation. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And that was more than once talked about during the Future Places project. Getting to that standard would be, like I said, a pretty big sea change in the city of Atlanta's way of doing business. But we think it's something that should be talked about, as preservation advocates.
Okay. We had two hands to come up, I guess.
Sure.
Mr. or Mrs. Kumar.
Hi, this is Papan Kumar, and I apologize. This may have been discussed. I joined a bit late. Would you be sending out slides and contact info to the participants after the meeting?
So we will send out a copy of the presentation, and in the presentation, as well as the email, I can directly put Doug's information following, which will also have an evaluation of the course. So yes. Mrs. Nichols?
Hi, thank you very much. I don't have a question. I just wanted to address the remarks from Ms. Baker. I'm the zoning chair for NPUZ, and we do have master plan and Jonesboro Road corridor study and a lot of information that's in place. I think she may be referring to the old Atlanta housing property on Jonesboro Road. A lot of vacant land out there. But if she'd like to contact me, or we'll be meeting on the fourth Monday night, and we will be happy to give her some information.
Awesome. Okay, great. Okay, well, this concludes our course for today. I would like to thank everyone for participating tonight and staying on. Thank you, Doug. I learned so much. I think everyone did as well. If you all are interested in more classes that we'll be offering, we will on September 29th, we will be offering our fourth installment of our parliamentary procedures course, and it's the role of the chairperson or presiding officer. This is on a Thursday, September 29th at 6 p.m. Following that, we have on Tuesday, October 4th, in our housing security series with Atlanta Legal Aid, how to avoid foreclosure. At 6 p.m. And then we have Thursday, October 13th, NPU 101, how does the NPU system work? And pretty much if you're not familiar, if this might be your first class, or you just moved into the community and you're just, or some people that need to know what NPUs are and what they do, this is the course for them. If you want to register for any of these courses, please visit www.npuatlanta.org. You can follow us on social media to receive updates on our classes, courses, and some of the things that we are doing in the NPU office. Our tag is at NPU Atlanta, and that's for Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And you can also find us on Nextdoor. So everyone, you will receive literally following the closeout of this, an email with an evaluation. Please just take the 2 to 3 minutes to complete it. It will also have a link that will go directly to our page that has this video as well as our other courses previously this year. And you can also register for those upcoming courses that I mentioned. So without further ado, thank you all and have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you. I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it permissible for us to link the Future Places video to the community site? Like on our community site, I post a lot about the NPU, and that